All right, what's up, everybody? Today is going to be week 5 of the Zerg perspective. Today we're actually just going to go over a very common variation. This build is going to be opening with mutas, 5 mutas to be exact, and then this is super important because a lot of Protoss on ladder like to skip anti-air. So like in the videos that I've been doing in the past, the first few weeks, I've been teaching a forge fast expand on the Protoss side, doing 1-1, which is Corsairs and Zealots. But if you can imagine, if they don't make any Corsairs and any +1 air weapons, they probably have speed Zealots much faster. They have a +1 ground weapons much faster, and they have more units much faster, right? So you might ask yourself, well, gee, like, how do I stop that? And I'm sure every Zerg watching this video is probably lost to this. I know I have. So basically what this build is going to be very similar to everything that happens in the 5-batch Hydra build, except when you scout that this is coming, or when you sniff this out, you should pivot into doing this opener rather than going forward and making Hydras, okay? So it's really important that as you learn builds, you're able to scout and you're able to react appropriately, right? So some of you, I know some of you are kind of like much lower level, like much lower in the ranks, and you find like on ladder you play against Protoss and you're like, gee, they don't really do what you're doing in that video, right? And that's because they're not playing with the build. But it's up to you to be able to identify when that's happening. Like when you scout something different, you have to learn how to pivot, right? And obviously I don't have time to go over every possible scenario because there are so many, in an infinite number of builds in the game, but I'm going to try to go over some of the most common ones, okay? So I think the Muta opener here is really strong because there's no downside to going this Muta opener, right? Like you could open this way and nothing really, like there's no risk to it really, like unless your opponent goes like blind double Stargate or something, that might be the only risk. But at the same time, your opponent really generally doesn't go blind double Stargate too much unless it's kind of like a series and they want to like trick you or something. So yeah, this is a really good opener even if they don't go for the 630 speed lots. Yeah, they basically just this build functions really well because the 5 mutas really scares Protoss. They don't know if it's 5 mutas or 9 mutas plus like 12 Scourge behind it. So it gets really, really scary as a Protoss player. So let's just kind of zoom through this, and I want to just focus on the pivotal point, okay? We all learned the overpull opening. I've conducted some tests for some of you guys in the live cohort, and you guys are all doing really well. Your builds look like almost pro gamer like, and you're executing really well. So everything up to a certain point looks exactly the same, but at this point I'm actually going to take off vision for myself, and the red Zerg here is Hawk. Notice that the Overlord should always be sitting at the natural of the Protoss player, but it could also go into the main, right? So I would actually recommend that if you're adjacent to your opponent, send the Overlord in the main. Just, I mean, sometimes you might lose it to a random Dragoon, but it's going to be worth it, especially on ladder. It's not required because this information is good enough for a high-level player to react and defend whatever happens. But even still, sometimes high-level players will lose to it. So I would recommend just send the Overlord in the main, but always have vision of what's in front with at least your second Overlord or like a Zergling, okay? What we're gonna look for is specifically the Zealot count, if you can, and also the timing at which the +1 starts, okay? So let's just keep an eye on this and just, okay, right there, 4 minutes, right? So you should, at around 4 minutes or 4:15-ish, look at the forge. Just go look at it. If it's spinning at about 4:15, their +1 upgrades are going to finish about 2 minutes later, okay? This means that their Zealots are going to be a lot more potent against your Zerglings when they have +1, right? So you don't want to ever make lings against +1 zealots unless it's like a crisis situation or if you're using them to body block. When in this case, we'll actually use them to body block, okay? So once you've confirmed that there's a +1 coming in here, let me just talk to you about this, okay? And I'm zooming in on this forge, just really emphasize, please look at it, okay? Because this is a screaming signal that this is going to be 630 speed lots, not, you know, Corsairs, not everything else, right? Because I spent 100 gas on this +1, I cannot afford both a Stargate and a Citadel, let alone, like, let me correct myself. If I get the Citadel and the Stargate, I can't afford +1 air weapons, okay? Because you don't have enough gas to do that. You can only choose like 2 out of the 3. So if you open with +1 attack, this is before your Citadel or your Stargate, this means that the Protoss tech is going to be limited, no matter what they do. They can't just conjure up some magical amounts of gas, okay? So from this point on, this would be the pivoting moment where like, I see the forge spinning. I'm going to pivot my build from 5-hatch Hydra into a 5-hatch Muta build and then move into Hydras if the game calls for it, okay? So I'm not going to look at all of the different details in the web. I just want to focus only on that 5-hatch Muta opener to deflect the Zealot push. And from there, you can kind of do what you want. You can play it with many Mutas. You can go back into Hydras with your build. But the important part is that you don't die to this, okay? So as a Zerg player, you're kind of just going on with your build, got some lings. At this point, I believe Hawk sees this. He doesn't necessarily like react to it until he sees more zealots. And that's kind of a sign of a good player who's also just like scouting for more information. Even though you see the +1, you're pretty sure, you still want to continue to check like other things as well, okay? So let's see how the build kind of deviates, right? So we're getting our drones. You know, we typically get our second hatchery about at like 32. He got at 34, 35. That's okay. He made a couple extra lings than you might because he's got 10 here. So he probably wants to be a little bit more aggressive with the lings. The difference is you have to not make your Den and Evo or cancel them on site, okay? So this is usually when he makes, you know, the second gas timing. But instead of making the Den and the Evo ASAP, you have to make extra overlords to prepare. So notice that there's extra overlords on the way to free up supply for the mutas to be done. So you want to start these overlords right at around 50% spires so that you have enough enough supply to be able to make the mutas, right? And notice that with a single gas, you have right at around 500 gas, right? Because the speed lots come at around 630, you want to start 2 creep colonies, 1 at each base. So he actually gets a den here, and I believe he might cancel it because he sees all the zealots. So he sees the zealots, right? He cancels into a creep colony, okay? Creep colony, and he didn't make his Evo chamber. And then from here, he actually made a super early gas, and this is maybe more of his style, so you don't have to make the gas. From here, you go ahead and make all of the mutas. And this is a cute play. He actually ran by with the lings, which is nice to kind of buy some time. But if you don't do this run by, and running by is it could do a lot of damage. Here, you know, I kind of blocked it a little bit. But if you have these 8 or 10 lings, split them up, come back home, block your ramp with those 4 to 6 lings, and then make mutas. And you can also make maybe like 4 to 6 pairs of lings, or I'm not pairs of lings, just 4 to 6 lings in order to kind of body block, right? Because I know that I said +1 zealots are super duper strong against the lings, but you need to buffer for damage while your mutas do the damage, okay? So notice that I got speed lots on the way, they're running in, but right at 630 is when the mutas will pop. So right as I get into his base, I'm gonna run into mutas, right? But as a Protoss player, if there's no Zerglings here, I could actually just split them up and then run them through, okay? Run them through into main. But if the lings were here, I wouldn't be able to go in. So if you wanted to play more defensive with the lings, you can definitely block this. Have like, you know, 4 or 6 lings over here, and just go ahead and make the mutas, and the mutas should be able to deal with this, okay? In this case, in this game, Hawk saw that there's no Stargate. He saw a really quick Templar Archives, and he actually opts to follow up with this by going many mutas and sunking up a little bit more, because there could be a 2 Archon follow-up, which is really deadly to only 5 mutas. Okay, so you really need a good SimCity, need 2 to 3 sunken colonies against that follow-up, but that doesn't mean it's always going to happen. Okay, usually you go many sunkens if you want to play very aggressive with a lot of mutas, because there's no Corsairs in play. Okay, so from here, notice that, you know, once you've kind of deflected it, you do want to go back into droning. Hawk's drones went down because my zealots killed a lot of them, but look how he like starts to drone right after this. And once you kind of get your drone back, go ahead and make your Hydroden, make your Evo chamber, make your 6th hatchery, go back to your fundamentals and making drones, hitting your 45, hitting your 55, except the fact that since they threw away their zealots, the timings are a little bit different. So I'm gonna pause the game here, and hopefully that was helpful. Try this build, try this variation, try to get those 5 mutas out right around 6:30. Try to get 1 sunken colony per base, like very smartly placed. Try to get your lings blocking your ramp and buffering at your 3rd to soak up some damage, and then kind of play it out from there. Okay, so the game can take many different directions, but just try to get those 3 things going, and hope that was good and helpful and that you're not losing to these kinds of plays. So good luck, and see you next week.